Good to be with you. Let me share a few slides also. Yeah, it's great that that this kind of innovation and that kind of these new entrepreneurs get support and get as much support from the ecosystem in Germany, in Heidelberg, or other parts of Baden-Württemberg and beyond, to really bring new ideas forward, to develop them forward into a solution for digital health solutions for patients. And yeah, I'm happy to share a few thoughts on particularly the collaboration aspect between earlier stage companies and large corporations. And you mentioned I'm kind of wearing these two hats. On the one hand, being with Roche Diagnostics, being a program lead there for digital health solutions. On the other hand, being part of that consortium that has been implementing and has been creating Startup Creasphere, an accelerator particularly for digital health solutions in Munich, or it started out of Munich and has grown beyond that. And I'm happy to share today a few thoughts on aspects to consider, particularly in different phases of maturing and growing your idea from that maybe very conceptual initial idea to an MVP, and to later on scale it with the help and with the support of corporations, but also further players in the healthcare system. Overall, I would really like to touch upon initially that aspect of the collaboration models. Secondly, I would like to mention briefly how we within the Creasphere Accelerator are particularly trying to drive the co-creation as part of pilot project and that accelerator program. And thirdly, I would also like to make it a bit more tangible, to share one specific example in the context of cardiac, where we are trying to bring different bits and pieces together to really build and to develop the next generation digital health solutions for Germany, for Europe, and beyond. Let me quickly start with just that one general slide about Roche, because I think it's key to understand that for all that, the kind of starting point really is that there is a big ambition and there's a big drive to really implement on new innovation, new inventions, to bring them to the market, to create a patient benefit. And within Roche, we've seen over the past years big investments in internal R&D, but also partnerships to drive innovation on the one hand, but also to set up new partnerships that are particularly crucial in the context of digital transformation, and particularly for these new digital health solutions. And maybe to dive a bit deeper into that aspect, I think the starting point for initiatives and for teams like ours to look into the collaboration with earlier stage companies in different stages is really that besides a classical internal research and development, but also the well-known M&A activities, and Roche was also very active there with Foundation Medicine, Flatiron in the digital space, that lots of innovation is actually happening close to universities, close to research, close to academia, where these kind of earlier ideas, earlier inventions have a big impact on that innovation potential. And we thought, hey, how can we tap into that space in a different approach? And we really wanted to do that on the one hand, not based on these classical, maybe sometimes desk research driven approaches, not in the way of like the big corporation is now working with a smaller team, but really to work on that eye level. And thirdly, I think a key element, particularly for digital, is that we early on realized that the digital solutions might have, or the adoption of that solutions will require a big change in clinical workflows, big change in the practices, so to say. and to really implement on that multiple stakeholders will be needed to develop these new solutions and to ensure that they are really adopted widely. And that's why we early on said we need to get on board not just startups, earlier stage companies and pharma diagnostic companies like Roche, but also further companies like insurers, providers, tech companies that all kind of need to work together to really implement on that new ideas. And we have basically, and I think this is a crucial point to understand. I think there is different needs of startups and earlier inventions and ideas depending on the respective stage. And here you can see basically the three standard and classical concepts of incubators, which rather focus on very early ideas that also have a conceptual component to it, where also larger corporations provide long-term engagement, long-term mentorship to really bring an early idea maybe to an MVP, really to bring that to the next level. And the next level then typically is that once there are some prototypes, you typically then need a bigger team, and bigger teams require investments, require certain company structures. So this is then the time where typically company builders or the foundation is really about creating a new entity. And also here, I think there is still a quite long-term engagement that we see in many functional areas, being it regulatory, being it data privacy, but also market access aspects, because I think this is then the border to the third kind of concept also of collaboration models between smaller companies and larger ones, the accelerator platforms, where it's about quite short-term engagement to really see, is there a fit between a startup team and a corporation? Is the solution right? We sometimes call it the 3 T's. Is the technology right? Is the team right? And also the traction there to really then scale that solution. And on the bottom, you can see just 3 examples of initiatives that Roche has been launching over the last years with the Starfinder Lab. This is, but also the biomedics in Heidelberg. I think that's early engagement in early ideas to build new innovation. The Starfinder Lab is particularly one that is focusing on digital solution in Israel. With the company builders, ROX is a team that just started beginning of the year with a very strong focus on Germany, particularly when seeing that with the DiGA there are now more and more reimbursement and business models coming up. The ROX team really is very much focusing on the German market and leveraging that opportunity DiGA brings. And I've seen from the previous presentations that there have been already quite a few talks touching upon market access, touching upon the DiGA, the regulatory aspects. So this is really something, particularly in the stage where you might have an early prototypes, but really want to collaborate with a larger company to get to the next level of also establishing a team, building a management team and infrastructure to grow your company. And Startup Creosphere, and this is also something I will dive a bit deeper in now, is one approach for rather, let's say, mid-late stage startups that are closer to market launch, where there might be, I don't know, 10, 20, 25% of development missing, but where there might be big benefits in sharing thoughts on what is actually needed in these last mile on development, on clinical trials and clinical evidence to really fit it to the different healthcare settings. But one aspect to mention is also that particularly Startup Creasphere as an accelerator is really looking for startups that have the ambition to scale their solution beyond their maybe home country, their region, like Europe, grow that into a global product, into a global solution, and that's why Startup Creasphere is really focusing on that rather later stage of companies. We are doing that, and I would just highlight that because this is a question that we frequently get asked. How do you kind of identify partners that you want to work with, and what's actually the benefit of working together? And these three phases roughly outline that. So we are, and I think that I'm now speaking for all the partners within the ecosystem, and I'm also getting to that a bit more in detail, being it the tech partners, being it the pharma partners, the DIA companies. We are really working here in a very, very focused way. So identifying partners through scouting activities, evaluating them in joint discussions, also then with the startups. And what we are really trying to do here is to see, is there a fit of the different strategic interests? So does the solution fit to the corporate world, but also does the collaboration also bring a benefit to the startup? And this is mostly done then in the accelerator phase, where we are working on two layers. There is, on the one hand, a layer where we have a kind of an open innovation approach. So companies in the program get exposed to functional coaches, functional experts from Roche, but also from all the other partners and outside that ecosystem. They are, on the other hand, getting exposed to VCs. So these VC introductions, VC matchmaking is also key to get the funding sorted. And then there is the second layer, which is rather that bilateral collaboration and co-working, working on a very, very specific pilot. Really something that you can implement within 3 months. This is the rough timeline that we are following, having a clear time boxing to see how far can we get within 3 months, having this as a milestone to then decide upon, is this a go, a no-go? Do we want to continue? And I think this really is a mutual decision. Was the time invested? And I think this is reasonable time that you invest over a period of 3 months. Is that worth continuing? Do we see a fit for the team, for the technology that we want to move forward? And yeah, we can see many different ways of collaborating then afterwards. 3 typical archetypes or typical scenarios we see is that we either see a joint development. So the project and the solution really need additional work over weeks, months, sometimes even if we are entering into a joint clinical study, years, 1 to 2 years, to really to manage that last mile until product launch. Then there is also many projects where it's more about, and many companies where it's more about, how do we actually implement that solution? We don't want to impact the development too much, but how do we actually implement and take that solution and maybe combine it, augment it with other solutions? And I'm later on also showing an example that I think is giving a good outline and a good overview of how we sometimes see the bigger picture, because yeah, startups are often very focused on solving one specific problem, focusing on one specific customer group, but sometimes really to have an impact on, for example, a patient journey end to end, it is more complex. It requires more bits and pieces to really have have a difference, make a difference here. I'm jumping over that slide a bit. It's just outlining that we are doing that in many different areas, from advanced data analytics, digital biomarkers, but also workflow solutions for labs. We are working in the meantime with it in that ecosystem on a global scale. We are also doing that together with the partner Plug and Play, who is a US VC and an accelerator that is has a global presence, and that is kind of our neutral partner for running these programs, but also very much supporting the different scouting activities to identify the right partners initially. I've mentioned quite a few times that ecosystem, and let me just explain a bit what I mean by that. I mean by that many solutions to really be successful, they need input, they need adoption of various stakeholders in the healthcare system. And with Roche and the consumer health business of Sanofi, there are two kind of founding partners who initiated that Creasphere platform, but in the meantime also Lonza more on the manufacturing side, but also providers like the Sana clinics and the University Clinic Schleswig-Holstein joined the initiative to really co-create and really work together in that area, and also with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and tech companies like Microsoft. That's a bit of broader picture on reviewing certain new solutions, and also a good ecosystem of providing input to the startups, where we have very fast turnaround times. If we think about, hey, can we get a provider, can we get a feedback from clinicians on that specific idea, we can in that ecosystem easily pull in experts from the different sites, from the different partners. And maybe just before diving a bit deeper into that, one specific example, just want to highlight that we've seen a good traction, because by really working together on smaller pilot projects, this forms a good basis to really test things out together. And by working on a pilot project, you actually manage to get from that, we get in endless discussions on things. We get from that talking into the doing, and that is really a good thing. And we are very happy that many of that over 30 companies we've worked with in the last almost 3 years have been integrated into projects within Roche, but also with customers and providers that we work with. As mentioned, I want to give one very concrete example to make it a bit more tangible what startup collaboration or also these pilots mean. And let me explain that based on the very specific example of it's like a concept we are still following. So it's not a product yet. It's a concept where we are bringing different startup solutions together for like an integrated cardiac disease management. And here we are talking about, if you, for example, take atrial fibrillation, that in that overall journey, it's key to identify atrial fibrillation early on, and digital biomarkers have huge potential here. But in the end, it's not just about the screening. It's about then also confirming the diagnosis. It's about certain risk predictions on aspects like stroke, bleeding, but also related to the therapy, and then also monitoring that long-term over in cardiac, not just months, but years. And what we are doing here and what we are testing and piloting together at multiple sites in Germany, in Netherlands, in Belgium, is to, on the one hand, leverage a digital solution, a smartphone solution as a digital biomarker to detect atrial fibrillation. And with FibriCheck, there is a company a previous participant in the program, where you just need your smartphone and you place your finger in front of the camera and the LED, and with the light impulses and the camera, you can actually do a light version of an ECG and detect these heart arrhythmia. FibriCheck is one company that we worked with quite early on, and they really have a great product that you can already now find in certain Fitbit products or as an app, really to do screening, low cost, fast access. And that company has seen, for example, also in the context of COVID-19, where risk patients didn't want to see a cardiologist or their doctor, they've seen a huge uptake of their solution because it's easy to use and has a good compliance. Moving on to the next step. So you have now identified certain people that might have heart arrhythmia, that might be AFib candidates. So how about confirming that? The state of the art are these Holter ECGs, really 24 hours, comfort limited. Companies like SmartCardia have developed a patch with a single lead ECG, but also with a AI solution to do an automated readout of that ECG. And you can really wear it as a patch. You stick it on your chest, can wear it for hours, for a couple of days, and can monitor that in a much more comfortable way, and can add that component to that overall disease management concept. Then just to close the loop, after the confirmation, it's also about actually how can you do the risk prediction, how can you do a specific therapy guidance, and here novel and existing biomarkers, including the risk scores, kick in. And this is also how we see the link between our core business and augmenting that core business with additional digital solutions to build more end-to-end solutions. And overall, now when people are back in monitoring and living their lives with the anticoagulation a drug or something like that, it's also about monitoring. And here again, solutions like FibriCheck can be low cost and easy to use solutions to do that monitoring at home. Last but not least, to really kind of unlock that full potential of the solution. At the moment, I was still talking about like individual bits and pieces, but how do you actually integrate them, and how do you manage that flow of information? And here, one also alumni of our program called Vita Health comes into play. That's a company that is really focusing purely on the data handling and kind of providing the dashboards and interaction between these different players in that overall use case and setting. So really integrating data from wearables, from smartwatches, integrating data from medical records, providing them on the one hand to the person with the symptoms, their families, providing the information also to physicians, to clinicians in different domains, and really steering that flow of information along the patient journey. I hope that example provided a bit of insights into how we at Roche think of that specific use case, that concept, how we might bring different bits and pieces together. And I think it's also quite a nice example in showing that how we can actually leverage individual solutions, how we can partner with earlier stage companies that are developing that individual solutions, but in the end, to unlock the full potential, let's bring them together and co-create these new bigger solutions. And that's an example that I wanted to mention that is really outlining that early ideas that might come from an incubator really make their way through company builders to establish a corporation, to build a team, to grow that solution into the acceleration, where it's really about how can we bring the bits and pieces together to really scale that solution and bring it to the patient, because that's what we are ultimately all striving for. That's it so far from my end.